New South Wales, as we know, has the most number of cases, but the number of active cases continues to decline. Do you have any hope that you can eradicate this thing?
No, given the size of our population, Kieran, I don't think we can, but we're getting really close to literally, crushing the curve, not just flattening it. But we have to assume people in our state are walking around with the virus and not knowing they've got it, and we keep an eye in particular on the community-to-community transmission. So today, for example, we know that we've got 8 new cases, but 5 of them are from people who've come from overseas. So 3 of them are community-to-community transmission. So we have a whole range of detectives, health detectives, who go out there to make sure we contact trace. And to be honest, it's one of the reasons why we've been able to reduce the rate of new cases from, a peak of around 212 back in March to down to a handful. And it's been a team effort, but it's also involved the high rates of testing continuously. We've been testing since Australia Day, and to be able to test a certain number of people every day and to make sure you flush out all the cases and stop that community-to-community transmission has been absolutely vital. But also to be ready to really clamp down on a breakout. So whether it's a school or any other institution or any other community area, we've now got pop-up clinics which can come up in a very short period of time. For example, we knew that in part of Sydney, the Bondi to Waverley area had a very high number of community transmissions, so we had a pop-up clinic there within a day or two and recommended everybody come forward and get tested, and the community's been responding in leaps and bounds. And I'm very proud of the fact New South Wales has one of the highest rates of testing anywhere on the planet, and our ability to contact trace and to let people know that they're under threat or need to isolate is also part of that strategy.
A National Cabinet is not meeting now until May the 29th, a fortnight's time. The first time the National Cabinet has gone more than a week without a meeting. Is this a sign of confidence, or is it a sign that you want to see and monitor the changes which have come into effect over the last couple of days in terms of the easing of those restrictions?
Kieran, I think it's fair to say that we've done the hard yards as a National Cabinet over a number of weeks to set the plan for the path forward, for how we get the better balance. We've balanced well in addressing the health crisis, but the economic disaster we have before us, we haven't struck the right balance yet. So we know that every time you ease a restriction, you are going to get a number of cases, but at least we have a path forward. And now every state can move with confidence that, given we have the overall framework, we can all move at our own pace in how we open up our economies. And certainly when New South Wales is concerned, there's a reason why we didn't close down our borders. There's a reason why we didn't put any limits on how far people could travel within the state, even when the restrictions were in place, to visit family or to work. So we're really keen to open up parts of our community which have a low health risk but really generate jobs. And one example is with the real estate industry, where we actually announced easing of restrictions on on-site inspections and the like way before it came on the agenda. So we're looking for opportunities in New South Wales now where we can push the boundaries on the economic side to bring back some of those jobs we've lost. I mean, New South Wales sustained the greatest degree of job losses in April. We are more subject or more at risk to tourism and international trade and other issues because of Sydney being the global city it is. So we were hit the hardest, and it's our job now as a government to make sure we replace those jobs and really invigorate parts of our economy that can give people hope for the future.
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic. I mean, the consumer sentiment numbers that came out just a week ago showed New South Wales had the highest consumer sentiment, notwithstanding the major job losses. So I'm very optimistic about the future.
Yeah, well, we hope that that optimism is well placed in terms of the economic performance of New South Wales and the nation. I'll ask you a bit more on the economy in a moment, but just on the medical capacity that we have in Australia at the moment. We know the ventilators have got up to 7,500 in terms of the numbers. There is heaps more capacity in ICUs around the nation. Are you satisfied that your state is ready in the event that we see a worst case scenario second wave?
Kieran, can I just ask everybody to be careful about rattling off the number of ventilators or other things we have, because as I say to our people here in New South Wales, and we take a very focused, determined, disciplined approach, having an intensive care bed with a ventilator means you also need a staff member with 4 pieces of PPE, 4 pieces of equipment they need. You know, the safe eyewear, the mask, the gloves and the gown. So that's where we count 1 bed. So we've been able to double, and we've nearly tripled our intensive care capacity in New South Wales. And our intention is to quadruple that, which we hope to get to in a short period of time. And that will certainly give us the capacity to look after our citizens, but also the confidence to move forward in terms of freeing up the economy and firing up the economy. And these are difficult decisions, because you know in your heart and in your head that every time you ease a restriction, it's going to increase the number of cases. And we also know that we have the capacity to deal with them. But you're still thinking or concerned about how contagious the virus is, how deadly it is. And the key thing in dealing with the virus is to make sure we protect the most vulnerable, because we know people of a certain age or people with certain underlying conditions are the ones most susceptible to suffering the very serious consequences or worse. So they are top of mind in the strategy, as is finding the right balance, which none of the states have found yet. We don't have a sufficient level of economic activity to sustain us, and that's the right balance all of us need to find for our states, whilst maintaining a manageable number of cases. And don't ask me what that number is, because nobody would be able to tell you what that number is. But we'll know when we look at all the different criteria, the level of activity in the community, what we can sustain as a manageable number of cases moving forward.
Premier, do you accept that there will need to be bold economic reform in the recovery phase out of this crisis? And do you think the National Cabinet is a good mechanism by which to achieve agreement on such a way forward?
Kieran, you would have had me on that question before COVID. Our federation is ripe for economic reform. Our federation hasn't changed in decades. Our federation assumes all the states have the same population, the same economic diversity, which we don't. And this process has really, I think, highlighted that. And the National Cabinet has demonstrated what can be achieved. And to be frank, COAG can at times be very clumsy. COAG can be very bureaucratic and full of red tape, and I think the National Cabinet has really empowered us as leaders to take things forward in a considered but very timely way, without getting bogged down in the red tape, which can often hang around these processes.
Should the federal government be, I mean, not just the federal government, but the states as well, the National Cabinet, should it be open-minded enough to look at the GST as part of that mix in terms of the reforms?
I think we should put everything on the table, Kieran, but I know that there will be some philosophical differences we'll have to get through. New South Wales has a very strong position, as we've always had, that we won't support anything unless it reduces the burden on our citizens. We've always supported public investment in infrastructure, empowering the private sector to invest as ways in which we generate our economic growth and our economic activity, and this sustained our state well. I mean, before we went into the COVID pandemic, we had by far the strongest budget and economy in Australia, and I hope we'll get there again. But having said that, to take a hit like we have in April, where 212,000 people are no longer working, and that's not counting the JobKeeper numbers, we know we've got our work cut out for us. But I also think we're up for the challenge. We have one of the highest, highly skilled and highly educated people in the world living in New South Wales. We have great institutions, and I also think a capacity to innovate. About a month ago, when I said to the business community, it was a call to arms, saying if you feel you can change what you're doing, if you can retool to provide or support us in our medical supply needs, or retool to support us in developing manufacturing or getting us through the pandemic. We had over 2,000 businesses that came forward. We've engaged with about 1,600 of them, and now we're in a position where we've got 2 prototypes going to actually manufacture ventilators here in New South Wales. So that demonstrates to me how innovative, flexible and nimble our business community is, and how ready they are for the challenge. And not every business will be able to recalibrate, but we've even seen now how some smaller cafes and medium-sized businesses are making more money through other means, through delivery, through takeaway. Not suggesting that's a sustainable business model, but it's demonstrated the capacity of people to innovate. And governments can make good policy, but we also have to allow the private sector the flexibility to innovate. And I think the future will see and should see far less regulation. Of course, regulatory framework has to be there to keep the community safe and to be a safeguard. But we also have to appreciate that we have to let people with good ideas and courage to really thrive in this environment, because that's what we'll need oodles of, courage and good innovation to really support that economic activity.
Yeah, the innovation has been so impressive throughout this crisis to see how businesses have adapted. It's one industry, though, which really can't do much without people coming, is the tourism industry. The Prime Minister on Friday spoke about his keenness to have the state borders opened up so that at least we can have domestic tourism flowing from the July school holidays. I know the northern part of your state and others, but particularly the northern part of your state and the Queensland border would be relevant to this. Would you like to see the state borders open up as soon as possible for that tourism industry purpose?
Well, in fact, I've been quietly having a jibe at all of my state colleagues who have their borders shut. New South Wales didn't, Victoria didn't. We appreciate that the key to our economic success will be to improve our supply chains and our manufacturing base amongst Australia. So you do need to get those borders open as soon as possible, in my view, Kieran. And I think what's important is, even though we have tourism as one of our best industries in Australia, especially in New South Wales, but the terms of trade are against us. We actually have more people go overseas than come in terms of spending the tourism dollar. But imagine if we actually had more of our 25 million population visiting places around Australia. I mean, that is enormous potential, and the sooner we can do that, the better, in a safe way. So the sooner the borders come down, the better, and I'm certainly looking forward to that. I don't want to be able to say to people, I'm allowed to go to Auckland before I can go to Brisbane or before I can go to Perth. So I'd really like to see those borders come down, because just that trade and commerce and flexible workforce across the states will boost our economy no end.
I know this is a question you've probably been asked a lot, and it's certainly something I think our viewers are really keen to know all the time, the latest on a vaccine. What's the latest advice that you've got on the prospects of a vaccine with about 100 trials underway around the world?
Kieran, the advice I've received hasn't changed, and the real answer is people just don't know. Everyone's hopeful and optimistic. But we've been told anywhere up to a year to 18 months, but it could be sooner. The reality is nobody really knows. Once you have a vaccine that goes to clinical trial and then goes open to market, there's all those issues that we have to go through. So I think what we should assume is that we have to live with the pandemic for a period, and therefore we should structure our way of life to live with the pandemic, and therefore the more parts of our economy we can open without just having this blind hope that a vaccine's around the corner, the better it is for us. And I feel that if we can have a COVID-safe environment, and many places around the world unfortunately haven't, the UK and the US have lifted their restrictions when they're still seeing a very high number of new cases every day. So I'm not sure how they're going to go with those high number of cases plus lift restrictions. At least in Australia, we have options before us, because we have a very low number of cases and yet the options to really work on our economy and have a COVID-safe environment. And I think that should be the attitude. We shouldn't just pin our hopes on a vaccine. We should really look for opportunities where we can push the envelope, get the jobs going, and move around safely through social distancing and through the various restrictions we have in place.
Some of your state colleagues have urged the government to get things back on track in terms of the bilateral relationship with China. I speak of Premier Palaszczuk and McGowan in that sense, worried about a trade war. What's your sense of this relationship at the moment? Do you believe that we can re-establish a workable relationship with China despite the very significant differences right now?
Well, Kieran, interesting question, and I've always had this attitude in New South Wales. The federal government, the national government, has to look after our national interests. They have to be keenly aware of all those issues which Commonwealth governments have to be aware of when determining how Australia's relationship is with our foreign partners, whether it's through trade or government-to-government relations, etc. But the states or the provinces don't have those challenges. So I always say to all of our trading partners, to all of our government leaders at a provincial level, that province to state or state to province, sister city to sister city, business to business, government to government, all those things at a provincial level will continue as far as I'm concerned in New South Wales. But that doesn't take away from the very legitimate policy framework which the federal government has to work within. It's their job to take care of our national interests, it's their job to take care of our foreign affairs, and I respect that. But from a state perspective, we have some greater flexibility in many ways. We can make sure that we set our own tone in terms of the way we deal with our counterparts. I don't have to deal with national leaders, I deal with provincial leaders, or I deal with of mayors of sister cities with which we have relationships, and obviously those business-to-business contacts will continue to exist. But I think I would say to my state premiers, not that they would welcome the advice, and I'm sure I wouldn't, I'll be careful about what advice I take from them, but certainly there's nothing to preclude us as state premiers from doing what we think is appropriate at a provincial level, but we have to deeply respect the Commonwealth's ability to manage our security issues, our trade issues, our diplomatic issues based on what they think is in the national interest.
And finally, Premier, before I let you go, where do you hope to see your state in 12 months from now?
In 12 months from now, I hope, assuming there's no cure, that we have a healthy level of economic activity, that people have jobs, that people are optimistic about the future, and that the number of cases of the virus still remains manageable. But certainly, as far as New South Wales is concerned, I want us to get back as many of those jobs that we've lost, and certainly look at opportunities which can make New South Wales the safe haven around the world for people to invest. I think a COVID-safe state, I mean, traditionally people, we all know this, as much as we love the US and the UK, we were often third in people's consideration about where they go to university or where they invest or what they do. Perhaps this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate we're a COVID-safe environment where people can invest, can travel to, and can even study. And I think we have the capacity to attract the best brains in the world. We also have the capacity to lead the world in some areas like advanced manufacturing, which doesn't require a lot of labour, but it requires high-skilled labour. And I think there are opportunities for us to shine in, and they're the opportunities and the vision we have for New South Wales.
Well, Premier, I appreciate your time. It's a very busy time for you, I know, and thank you for your time on Sky News today.
Pleasure. Thank you, Kieran.